Good afternoon, everybody. May I first begin by thanking Bharat and everybody at Geetam for having me here. It's been a long time, actually, since I've done one of these. More than 2 years now, which for me is a fairly long gap. So I'm a little rusty. And the reason I'm sitting down is because if I was standing behind the podium, my knees would be knocking a little bit. So it's safer for me to sit down and do this, but be that as it may. I'd like to begin first and foremost by congratulating the incoming first batch of the Kautilya Masters in Public Policy students, because this is indeed a very important avenue that I don't believe has been explored as much by our education institutions as it needed to be. And to see so many of you enthusiastic faces here going forward in this sphere is indeed encouraging. Now, I have come to pitch public policy of avenues in politics, because I believe that it's not an avenue that any of you would be looking at. But to my mind, it's really the natural avenue that you should be looking to gravitate towards. Because at the end of the day, what is public policy? Rules, regulations, framework, systems that are put into place usually by the government or representatives of the government to direct something in the public sphere. How does public policy get formed? It gets formed by political action, by lobbying, NGOs, business houses, other interested groups. Public policy gets formulated by technological advancements, scientific changes. These are the sort of avenues that affect change in public policy. But at the end of the day, public policy, as I said right in the beginning, is driven through the government. Government is driven by politics. And therefore, if you are interested in public policy, willy-nilly, the way I look at it, you're interested in politics as well. And if you want to affect change in public policy, the biggest way to affect change in public policy is through government, and the best way to get into government is through politics. It's not a permanent position, at least not in a democracy, though some would like it to be. That's not the way it works. It's also not a closed shop. Now, a lot of you sitting here will be saying, oh, well, it's easy for him. He's a third-generation politician. What did he have to struggle for? Which is true. I will not deny the fact that being a third-generation politician made it easier for me to enter into the sphere of politics. I contested my first parliament election before I was 28. I was a minister in the union government when I was 29. I was Minister of State for External Affairs, I think just about after my 30th birthday. I actually had the opportunity and the pleasure and the privilege of working very closely with your Dean, Sayyid Akbaruddin Saab. He was Consul General in Jeddah when I was MOS External Affairs. So it's actually nice to be to be able to meet up with him in a completely different avatar. But the point I'm making is that don't look at me as the norm for what politics is. Because believe me, family politicians are actually the exception. The majority of political parties are made up by people who do not belong to political parties, to political families. If a political party depended purely on second, third, fourth generation politicians for their leadership or for their cadre, that party would be doomed to fail. And this country needs new thinking. It needs new faces. It needs new people to come forward and affect change, both in the way politics is done and in the way in which politics is used to change the greater good. And therefore, studying public policy and looking towards changing making changes, whether small at the very grassroots level or much bigger changes at the national level, there is no better place than politics. And therefore, when you finish with your studies in public policy and you start asking yourself, what am I going to do with this master's degree that I have now acquired from Kautilya? What are the avenues open for me? The only point that I have come here to put in front of you is, don't automatically rule out the option of looking at politics, because as I said right in the beginning, there is no greater sphere for affecting change in public policy, and we need change to be for the good. Far too often politicians, and perhaps jaded politicians like myself, are responsible for affecting change that is not for the good. We need a new generation of politicians that can come forward, perhaps with less baggage than some of us have, and look at problems with a fresh approach. Look at it with the benefit of the education that an institution, that an organization like this will give you, and then come forward. Nothing has to be permanent. An entry into politics does not mean that it's a one-way street and there is no exit. It may not suit everybody, but give it a try. What do you have to lose? There are, as I said, more than enough avenues and opportunities. The idea is just to approach them with an open mind. And truly, there is nothing more satisfying than being able to, even in the minutest way, make a change that benefits somebody's life. If you can contribute towards a scheme that allows a youngster to find meaningful employment, if you can contribute towards a scheme that allows a widow a dignified life, if you can contribute towards a scheme that allows children to access education that they didn't have before, no matter how small the contribution may be, believe me, it comes with a lot of satisfaction. Not every day is going to be like that. There will be days that will be filled with immense frustration. But tell me, which job doesn't come with frustration? Professors in universities and colleges will have days when they're frustrated. They'll probably be frustrated with their students' results at the end of the year. Sports persons would be frustrated with their performance after putting in a hard day's work. Business people sometimes get frustrated with the results of their businesses, as is politics. And lastly, politics is not simply a den of thieves. We are not all crooked individuals out to make a quick buck. So that's another reason that I've come to ask you not to dismiss politics as an option, because it's very easy to say, "Yaar, wo sab sale chor hain." Oops, excuse me, sorry. Wo sab chor hain. And just be dismissive of it. You'll find bad apples in any box, any line of work, any sphere. We are no different. Ratio-wise, we may have a few more than others. But again, with this last sort of appeal, that use the education you will get here for the greater good. And the greater good means not just me and my family or my immediate neighbors, but society as a whole. Then look at the option that I have put in front of you. And who knows, there may be future cabinet ministers, future chief ministers, future national leaders sitting amongst the first batch of students who will go into Kautilya for their masters in public policy. And I think that's it for opening statement. From here on, I'll let Manika take the questions.
So we'll get to a lot of questions. I have to say your last remark will make Prateek, our co-founder, very happy, who sees this first cohort going places. But I did want to ask you, Omar, when you were speaking about asking students to come into politics, and you said it's not just about dynastic politics. India needs other people. A huge part about fighting elections today or getting into politics is money, which is also a big deterrent for a lot of people who say, Where will I get this money from? What is your answer to that?
Look, I accept it would probably be impossible for most of you to fight as independent politicians or independent candidates. But also the sort of election you're looking at is a parliamentary one, and very few people go straight into parliament elections. Plus, more often than not, political parties also help out with it. Start small. Be sort of reasonable in your expectations in terms of the entry point at which you will start. Nobody's saying you have to go straight into the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. Local regional government is a great opening and is not an expensive place to start politics. A lot of places, even contesting an MLA election is not difficult. If you have the right party, which has sort of a good brand equity going with it, it won't cost you if you're willing to contribute and work. Look, I mean, I'll give you a small example, which may be a little misplaced, but there are very different ways of coming into politics and into the public sphere. In the morning, you had a session with Priyanka Chaturvedi, and she, I think, is a fairly sort of good example for me to use, because I first sort of she came to my attention because I found her vociferously defending the UPA when Dr. Manmohan Singh was in power, and she would do it on Twitter, and she wasn't really aligned with the Congress, but she was very sort of vocal in defending the Congress and its policies, and in turn then joined the Congress and got elevated to the post of a spokesperson, then had problems with the Congress and fell out with them and joined the Shiv Sena, and today is the deputy leader of the Shiv Sena in the Rajya Sabha. And I don't think she spent a penny on her political career. She used her brains, her ability to tweet, to put policy and thought into 150 odd 6 characters or whatever it was at that time, and she started from there, and look where she is today. So again, don't just look at the Lok Sabha poll as the only way of coming into politics or the only way of attracting attention or making change. Look at her as an example. She used her Twitter handle, and today she's the deputy leader of the Shiv Sena in the Rajya Sabha. There you go.
Okay, great. So who has questions? Okay. Let's start with the young lady here in the pink. Can we please give her a mic?
Hello, sir. I'm Soumya. So you just consider it as a new model of democracy of putting you under the house arrest, especially during the time of 2nd anniversary of Pulwama attack. So what, according to you, is a real democracy that can be achieved in the state of Jammu Kashmir or Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir? So do we still have a hope that people of Jammu Kashmir have trust on India because of the policies or government of India? So what else can be done? Is it through behavioral change or through any kind of developmental activities? We can have a hope on people of Jammu Kashmir that we are still together.
Well, let's first be very clear. What happened in Jammu and Kashmir was not democratic. Because if what had happened in Jammu and Kashmir had been with the will of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, I would have accepted it. I mean, we're sitting here in Telangana. Telangana state was formed because of the will of the people of Telangana. The assembly passed a resolution that allowed for the state to be established. Jammu and Kashmir passed no such thing. In fact, it was on no political party's agenda to break up Jammu and Kashmir into 2 and then downgrade them into union territories. I'm not even going to get into the constitutional arguments about what happened with 370 and 35A, because that's too long and I don't want to bore you with all that. So don't for a moment kid yourself that what happened in Jammu and Kashmir was democratic. If it was, you wouldn't have needed to lock people like me up for 9 months or Mehbooba Mufti for more than a year. 2 years ago this time, which is why this is such a surreal experience for me. 2 years ago this time, I was a guest of the government. My vision of the outside world was literally what I could see out of my window and no further than that. I didn't have any access to family for 3 weeks and no access to TV or newspaper for 5 weeks. So by no definition is that democratic. Now, you ask me, what can you do? What new democracy can you bring to Jammu and Kashmir? We don't need new democracy. We just need the democracy that everybody else gets, where our will should be what matters, the will of the majority of the people. Let elections take place, let the people throw up the government that they choose, and let that government then decide what is better for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. That's all we ask for. And if you want to regain or rebuild trust, then really all you have to do is to put into action the words of the Honorable Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said that the problem with Jammu and Kashmir is that there is a distance of hearts and there is a geographical distance, Dil ki duri or Dilli se duri, distance from Delhi and distance of hearts. Correct this and most of your problem will go away. But with the caveat, you will always have a disaffected population in Jammu and Kashmir that does not accept what happened in 1947. It will always be there. There will always be a constituency. Your aim has to be to shrink that constituency. You will never be able to eradicate it, but you will be able to shrink it. If that is the aim that you go forward with, you will succeed. But you have to do it by, as I said, removing Dilli se duri or Dil ki duri.
My question is how you compare single party majority government. It may be efficient, but it may become authoritarian with a coalition government which may be more accountable but may be inefficient. So, and is opposition doing enough to hold the majority government accountable right now?
You know, that's a really good question, and you're right. This is a conflict of interest that we often have. I mean, should you have a majority government or should you have a coalition? Why can't you have a leader of a majority government who is not authoritarian and have the best of both worlds? It is possible. You can also have leaders of coalitions who can be effective leaders, provided the coalition partners know how to behave. I've led a coalition government in J&K for 6 years. I would respectfully beg to disagree that coalition governments are inefficient governments. We may not have been the best government, but I, in my own defense, would like to believe that we did deliver at least something. There's no reason why a single party government has to be an authoritarian one. It depends on the person who heads that particular government. You can have authoritarian coalition leaders as well. Anyway, I'm not going to get into examples. It'll just run me into trouble. And is the opposition doing enough to hold the government accountable? No.
Expand
we need
on
to
that.
do more. Well, J&K is an example. The opposition virtually rolled over. What you had was sheer tokenism in terms of sort of being opposed to what was happening. Not just what happened in Parliament on the 5th of August 2019, but then even the detentions of so many political leaders. You had one odd statement here, one odd statement there, but for the most part, the opposition completely disappeared. We tie ourselves up in knots. We get sort of very aggressive on some policies and some developments, but forget about other things. And I'll probably put me at odds with a lot of the opposition people. I do not believe there are votes in opposition people standing on tables in Parliament and tearing papers. I truly don't believe that, which is why as an opposition leader, when we were in opposition in the assembly in J&K, that was one of the things I neither did nor was I happy with my party people doing. I believe that disrupting Parliament, and I've been a minister, so I'm talking from experience. The days that I prepared my answers for starred questions, I used to sit there hoping that somebody would disrupt the House, because it gave me such an easy exit. I wasn't answerable to anybody. And the officers were also happy, because their pet sort of concern was, sir, don't go to the House and give any assurance. Say whatever you like. Just don't give an assurance, because if you give an assurance, we get hauled up. So they were also happy when the House was disrupted. So I think when we disrupt Parliament, we're actually doing the government a favor. We're not being an effective opposition. But my view clearly is the minority.
Okay, the gentleman in the white, can we just pass the mic to him? And after you ask your question, just give the mic back. If you keep passing it around, then we'll never get everyone done.
Hello, sir. My name is Himanshu, and I want to ask about youth of Kashmir. हमने देखा है कि 1990s से काफ़ी इन्फ्लक्स है यूथ का इंसर्जेंसी में, लेकिन कोई ह्यूमनिस्टिक अप्रोच नहीं है उस चीज़ को देखने के लिए. हम किसी का एनकाउंटर कर देते हैं, बाकी रेस्ट ऑफ कंट्री एंजॉय कर देती, लेकिन हम ये भूल जाते हैं कि वाई उस पर्टिकुलर यूथ ने गन क्यों उठाई, इस पे क्यों नहीं बात होती है. और अगर आपके पास ऐसा कुछ आइडिया है कि ह्यूमनिस्टिक अप्रोच होनी चाहिए, तो आपने या फिर सक्सेसिव गवर्नमेंट्स ने वहाँ की क्या किया है इसके लिए, और क्या चीज़ होनी चाहिए इस चीज़ के लिए?
बात तो होनी चाहिए. कोई नौजवान बंदूक उठाए तो हमें समझने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि वो क्यों उठा रहा है, लेकिन कोई एक वजह नहीं है. मैं आपसे ये कहूँ कि बस जी क्योंकि गरीबी है तो गरीबी की वजह से उन्होंने बंदूक उठाया, या बेरोज़गारी है तो बेरोज़गारी वजह बनी कि उन्होंने बंदूक उठाया. अलग अलग लोगों से आप पूछें तो उनके लिए वजह क्या थी वो अलग होगी. कुछ जो है उन्होंने सिक्योरिटी फोर्सेस के हाथों मार खाई, कुछ उन्हें अपने रिश्तेदारों को मरते हुए देखा, कुछ सियासी तौर उनकी सोच ही अलग थी तो वो पहले से ही उस दिशा में चले गए. लेकिन एक चीज़ पे मैं ये आपको कहना चाहता हूँ, ये जो आपने कहा ना कि वहाँ के पूरी यूथ जो है वो उस तरफ है, चलो आपने पूरी नहीं कहा, आपने कहा काफ़ी सारे. कितने मिलिटेंट होंगे जम्मू कश्मीर में आजकल? 100, 200, 300? अगर फौज का कोई जनरल यहाँ होता वो शायद आपसे कहता कि 300, 350, 400 से ज़्यादा नहीं. वो जम्मू कश्मीर की यूथ की अक्सरियत तो नहीं है. काफ़ी सारे नाराज़ हैं, लेकिन उन्होंने अभी भी बंदूक नहीं उठाया है. हमें उनकी नाराज़गी को समझने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए. और मैं फिर उस बात पे आता हूँ जिस बात पे जो मैंने पहले सवाल के जवाब में कहा था कि अगर हम ये मान के चल रहे हैं कि दिल्ली से दूरी है और दिल की दूरी है, तो वो दिल की दूरी क्यों है? किस बात पे नाराज़ है? आखिर हमने किया क्या? अगर हम लोगों का जमहूरी हक ही उनसे छीने और फिर हम लोगों से कहें आप नाराज़ क्यों? अरे वो नाराज़ तो होंगे ही. आप उनसे पूछे बिना उनकी रियासत के 2 टुकड़े करते हो, रियासत के 2 टुकड़े करने के बाद आप उसका यूटी बनाते हो, और फिर आप लोगों को यह भी नहीं कहते हो कि वापस कब करोगे. आप कहते हो जब हालात होंगे तब करेंगे. अरे कब होंगे ना? आप कहते हो जब नॉर्मल होगा. नॉर्मलसी का पैरामीटर मुझे बताइए, क्योंकि पिछले 30 साल में तो मैंने नॉर्मलसी नहीं देखी. इतना सारा करने के बाद फिर आप लोगों से कहते हो आप नाराज़ क्यों हो? कहीं ना कहीं तो नाराज़गी की वजह होती है. जम्मू कश्मीर के लोगों के साथ हालात ठीक करने के लिए कुछ इकदाम उठाए जाते हैं, कुछ कदम उठाए जाते हैं, फिर बिना पूछे उनको बंद किया जाता है. छोटी सी बात है. वाजपेयी साहब ने, जिनका आज डेथ एनिवर्सरी है, उन्होंने जम्मू कश्मीर में एक भावना को समझते हुए श्रीनगर और मुजफ्फराबाद का रास्ता खोला, सिर्फ उन लोगों के लिए जिनके रिश्तेदार पार हैं. चल रहा था, ठीक चल रहा था, लोग आ रहे थे जा रहे थे. बंद हुआ. किस वजह बंद हुआ अभी तक हमें समझ नहीं आया. अब इन छोटी छोटी चीज़ों से नाराज़गी पैदा हो जाती है, और कुछ नाराज़ नौजवान फिर बंदूक उठाते हैं. हमें कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि जब नाराज़गी नज़र आ जाए तो उसको हमें कम करना चाहिए.
Okay, let's take some from there. Okay. Can we get the mic there to the gentleman?
Do you want to shout? Because by the time the mic comes...
Yes. We'll... Bharadwaj, can you take
Can
your
you-
mask off? Yeah.
So my question is related to what you brought up earlier about Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi. you basically said that she got to where she was using, very intelligently using Twitter and growing through the party that way. So in the current day and age where people are being brought up for being critical of the BJP on Twitter or any social media for that matter, how is that going to play into that approach? Because I honestly do not see an approach where a person can get into the BJP by just fawning over them. They have enough fanboys for that. So the only way
you
to
can't get into the BJP?
No, in the sense, using Twitter as a medium, trying to get into the BJP is not going to happen as of today. Because there are enough fanboys for it. So which means your only option is to go against the BJP to get into the opposition. So with the way the rules are being enforced as of today, I honestly do not see that happening. So how do you propose?
Well, no, actually getting into the BJP by being sort of vocally supportive of them is a great way to go. And actually, given that the BJP prides itself on supporting the Kamdar and not the Namdar, you automatically, even if you're a Namdar, the moment you go to the BJP, you become a Kamdar. I actually think it would work equally well there.
The way I am looking at it, see, this is not the right way of doing this. I'm hoping this is not being televised, but
I'm
going
hoping
to. So I'm going to liken them to rabid dogs, which is not the right thing to say, but you're just going to be a voice amongst many. And a lot of the people in the BJP as of today are very, they're towing the party line at the same time are very, I don't know how to say it, but extreme. So you're just going to be a voice in many. So if you take a very neutral stance, that's...
Well, sorry, I don't want to cut you short, but honestly, if you're going to do neutral politics, the BJP is not the place for you.
Exactly.
So then, I mean, you're automatically a misfit. Then you might as well look somewhere else.
So that's my point. So the only way for you to be a neutral, even neutral policy, even a person who's trying to be neutral is now being taken as being picked on as an enemy of the BJP. So they're enforcing the social media laws where they're having people arrested just because they're calling it out. So how do you envision a repeat of what happened? I'm just going to pick Ms. Priyanka as the example. How do you envision something like that happening in this day and age? Where
Look, they're not in a position to pick up everyone who's critical of them.
True, but you need to stand out from the crowd, right? If you don't stand out from the crowd, why is the UPA going to be like, okay, I need to support this guy or I need to pick this guy up? So you need to stand out. If you're not...
Well, again, that comes back to the point. I mean, it's how cleverly you use the medium to stand out. It's how you package yourself and your message. Clearly, the way you're saying what you're saying has to be different from what I am doing, so that Manika notices what you're saying more than what I do. Look, she was a stray example.
Yeah, exactly.
I used it simply to point out that it's not just about money. There are other means to be identified.
If you're looking for a path into the BJP, I think smart trolling, because if you look at their trolls, they're not really very smart.
I agree with that, Manika. But so that leads to my next question, actually, related to that. Because you need money to be successful. That's not exactly true, but you can get there with other means. But in general, when you think about a politician, you think about someone spending money, oodles of money, to get to where he is. So even if you start lower down, what is the incentive for a person who, let us say in the panchayat elections, let's say he's become whatever the position is, sarpanch. So what is stopping that man from saying, okay, I need to advance in my career as a politician, so I need money. So now you have created a feedback loop where they're like, okay, I'm now in power, I need to collect money for my next election.
Yeah.
So how do you break people out of that?
You don't need to. So provided you collect the money honestly. You use the electoral bonds, collect the money and use it for your election.
But would that be enough?
That depends on you. If your brand equity is good enough and the work you've done on the ground is willing to speak for itself, you won't have to spend as much money.
Okay, this gentleman here in the spectacles. Yeah, here. No, the one who's standing up, the gray shirt. Is that gray or I'm colorblind?
We'll give it to him in the next one then. We'll just give it to you after this. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll give it to him after.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. So you spoke about how your detention and how even your father was detained, your family was detained, and how the opposition rolled over and there was literally no support for Kashmir. So I want to like ask a little personal question on that. So you were detained for 8 months, so was your father. He's like 84 and he was detained. And we still don't know what happened was constitutional or not, the abrogation till now. So the institutions didn't come to your rescue. No one, the BJP just woke up one day and they released you. Thank God. I mean, they released you like after 8 months, right? You were in that for 8 months. And like no support came for you. But after all that, after what the state has been, how do you still believe in the idea of India? Because you are the person who stood up in the parliament and said, I am a Muslim and I am an Indian, and I don't see any distinction between the two. Are you?
Well, I think it's because the idea of India is more important than what happens to one stray individual, or in fact, even a handful of people. If what happened to me happens to 1.3 billion people, or even a majority of those 1.3 billion people, then I will have to reconsider what my idea of India is. But it happened to me. It didn't happen to everybody. In fact, it didn't even happen to everybody in Kashmir.
But
And it's fine. I mean, I've made my peace with that. It was the price of being opposed to what the BJP and the central government was doing, and so be it.
I have a follow-up to that, in fact, because when I met you after you came out of house arrest, you were, even at that time, I think I was angrier than you were. And you were strangely just strong, and you still believed that we could get to a better place. And I just wanted to sort of ask you to talk a little bit about that. I know you've said I've reconciled myself to it, but where did that, I mean, strength
I don't
come
know,
from?
it's just who I am. I don't know, maybe I'm just more matter of fact. It is what it is. I mean, it took me a few days to sort of put things into perspective, and then you move on. There's no point dwelling on it. There's no point living in the past. If being angry about what happened to me could change what happened to me, I would be angry. But being angry about it isn't going to give me those 8 months back. It's not going to reverse what happened on the 5th of August 2019. There are lessons to be learned from it, but those lessons are only useful if you're looking forward. Those lessons are of no consequence if you're looking backwards. So look forward. It's fine. कुछ अच्छा ही निकलेगा इसमें से.
Okay. The gentleman.
Okay. Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. My name is Pritish. My question is in reference to your recent interview with Navika Kumar from Times Now.
Yeah, I think a big round of applause.
So my question is, she asked you, and I quote, so you want 73 years to be undone in 2, and you replied, make a start. My question is, based on what you said, make a start, have the regional political parties in erstwhile Jammu and Kashmir failed to do that, make a start, in the last 73 years? And how do these parties, whether it's National Conference, PDP, or the Gupkar Alliance, regain or build that public trust amongst the people of Kashmir?
No, the make a start was for the government, not for the political parties, because the interviewer basically came with the sort of template that is handed to them, which is that for 75 years nothing happened. And post 5th August 2019, now only good things will happen to J&K. So I asked her, okay, friend, assuming that nothing happened, and I sort of quoted all the things that we had done. I said, ignore all this. Now you tell us what you have done in the last 2 years. Point one single new thing out to me, where we can say, yes, you made a start at undoing all the wrongs and all the ills of the last 75 years. So I'm working on the assumption कि हमने कुछ नहीं किया, कि हम बेकार लोग थे, कि हमारी हुकूमत बिल्कुल नालायक थी, कि ये 70 साल जो हैं हमने पूरे तरह ज़ाया किए. ठीक है जी, हमसे कुछ नहीं हुआ. अब आप बताइए ना, अब आपने क्या किया? So I'm working on the assumption that I did nothing. So I have nothing to explain. I don't have to make a new start. I did nothing. I'm asking the person who has already signed my report card, कि ठीक है जी, now you tell us what you've done in 2 years. Unfortunately, then she fell back on that defense. I don't speak for the government. ठीक है, then that's that. You don't speak for the government. हो गया.
Just take the hand
No,
mic.
I take that the national flag was unfurled in a number of places. And
Yeah. So I'm asking, is it right for a heterogeneous audience that exists in Kashmir to homogenize it and bringing under the same flag?
I'm sorry, I'm completely lost. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
I'm asking, is it right to impose
Impose what?
the flag?
It's the national flag. They
But-
want to put it up, put it up. I'm sorry, but if 5th August 2019 was simply so that we could unfurl the national flag at a few other places, you didn't need to do this to us. Yeah, पहले ही झंडा चढ़ा देते. इनकार कौन कर रहा था? नवीन जिंदल साहब ने झंडे दिए. नवीन जिंदल साहब ने झंडे दिए. आप 2 साल पहले उनसे ले लेते. अगर मकसद यही था कि झंडे चढ़ाने हैं, तो जिंदल साहब को पहले ही ले आते. You didn't have to reduce us to a union territory, no? You didn't have to break J&K into 2 parts. You didn't have to go back on sovereign commitments made with the people of Jammu and Kashmir in 1947. You didn't have to lock me up for 8 months and others for even longer. You didn't have to lock up a couple of thousand people to unfurl the national flag. I unfurled the national flag myself 6 times on 15th August. I didn't need anybody's permission. I stood there, I unfurled the national flag, I saluted it and I moved on. I did it willingly. I didn't have to be forced to stand for the national anthem. I stood for the national anthem while people in the audience in the university functions would keep sitting. I did it. But what did I get in return for that? I saw my state dismembered.
So
I
does
saw
that upset you?
my state
So
reduced
does
to
that
a
upset
union
you now?
territory, and all you have to show me are a handful of flags being unfurled. If all it was about flags, we would have done this without you having to go through 5th August. You just had to come and tell us.
Can I just have a small follow-up? So I was having this conversation with A.S. Dulat, and he mentioned this, A.S. Dulat.
Oh, okay.
So he mentioned this, whenever India wants Farooq Abdullah to respond or to have support, he has always done that bit, whether it's with releasing during the time IC-814 or releasing during the time of Rubaiyat Said's kidnapping. So I want to ask right now, looking at this moment, will Mr. Farooq Abdullah take a step back if the government asks him to?
I can't answer for Dr. Farooq Abdullah. I truly can't. I am an individual in my own right as he is in his own. And if he was here, I wouldn't even presume to tell you what his answer would be. But I know this, that my father hasn't turned his back on the country either. My father continues to remain a member of parliament. He continues to represent his constituency in parliament. It's not like he has raised a separatist flag and gone storming off somewhere. So in that respect, my father hasn't changed. Is he a little bit more disappointed, maybe a little bit more upset and angry? Sure, we all have a right to be. But that anger, that disappointment hasn't manifested itself into something wider as to sort of be mistaken for being an anti-India sentiment.
Yeah, the gentleman in blue. Yeah.
And sorry, but I mean, just on the 2 examples that you cited, IC-814 and the Rubaiyat Said kidnapping, unfortunately, my father was right. And if the government of the day had listened to him, perhaps things would have been different. He was steadfast in his opposition in 1989-90 to the release of militants for Rubaiyat Sayyad's return. He was convinced and he knew that there was no way they would harm her. That popular backlash against kidnapping a young woman was so strong that they were looking for a way to give her back. But he was overruled, and that became the template which was then used, and you couldn't go against it when IC-814 happened. Because when IC-814 happened, people turned around and said, for one Home Minister's daughter, you released so many, why aren't you releasing them for my family members? And you had no answer. So like it or not, he was right, and a lot of what happened might not have if he had been listened to way back then. But history.
Okay.
So Basharat Peer, in his book Curfew Nights, he writes about Kashmir having around 8,000 half widows and how the security situation there is. At every single turn you take in Kashmir, there is a soldier standing with a rifle in his hands. So are the Kashmiri leaders failing to communicate this ground reality to the rest of the India, the narrative that is the original situation? Do you have any plans to communicate this to the larger audience so that there is more pressure on the government to start a democratic process?
I don't think there is anybody who in India who is sort of divorced from the reality of what J&K goes through. You know how many security forces there are. There's not a single TV channel or a single news bulletin that shows Kashmir that will not show you how many security force people there are. I don't think I need to tell you. And if I do, after 30 years of us having gone through it, then it's not us who have failed. It's you who have failed to see what we have been living under. So whether it is as they're called, half widows, or whether it is the sheer number of security forces, now we can get into a chicken and egg story. What came first? Did the security forces come first, or did the militant guns come first? But that's a whole different argument. My point is that I don't think there's anybody in India who is divorced from the reality of what is there on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir. And again, I'm sorry to keep laboring the point, but no less a person than the Prime Minister has admitted it, and admitted it publicly. So when you know there is Dilli se duri and Dil ki duri, then start addressing it.
Hi, sir. It was really nice to hear.
After this.
Yeah, you can take the two here then. Yeah.
It was really nice to hear people coming from a privilege of politics, telling that more young people or people not from dynasty should come in. But the question is also, at least within your party, that you speak for this now, that more people from normal backgrounds and student politics should come in. Were there any mechanisms that your party is trying to follow to encourage more people in youth to get into politics, or creating some kind of internships, some kind of fellowships, or some kind of institutional frameworks within the parties so that other parties can learn and kind of create these templates? Because right now the only template is make money, do whatever it takes to be in power, or get into power. Are we creating any other examples or templates in other parties so that other parties can learn and kind of change this wheel?
All we have done, and actually my party has been very active in the last few weeks in terms of promoting people from our youth organization to our parent organization, because I found from experience that youngsters were joining in our youth cadre the age of let's say 20, 22, and technically as per our constitution, once you cross the age of 40, you're supposed to graduate from the youth to the parent organization. The only problem is your youth spell is about 20 years in the party, but your parent spell can go on, God willing, if you live till 80, 90, then you're not going to leave any post, you'll hang on to it until the day you die. So we actually created vacancies within the organization for people who were being promoted from the youth to the parent wing of the party. We actually created openings at the district level, at the block level, at the provincial level, and at the central level. And those are reserved for people who are moving from the youth to the parent wing of the party, simply so that youngsters who join, because youngsters are coming in from universities, from college politics, generally starting in the panchayats and elsewhere, are looking to graduate into the parent wing of the party, but were finding no openings. So that we found actually has been a huge help in terms of encouraging a lot of other youngsters now to join the national conference. And over the last few weeks, we've seen an upsurge in youngsters coming and taking membership of the national conference, simply because they've now seen a path to progress in the hierarchy, where they can now aspire to office even in the parent wing of the party within, like in their 40s, which wasn't there earlier. So I think if others also look at that, it's a template to follow. I've so far never had a request for an internship. Honestly, I wouldn't know what to do with an intern, but if I did...
Make coffee and get papers.
Well, I'll take that under advice then.
Okay, Professor Nagendra and then Reema.
Sir, with humbly I want to correct a minor one, which is Andhra Pradesh Assembly did not pass resolution for the separation of the states, sir. It was also forced upon the people of Andhra Pradesh.
Okay.
That's,
I stand corrected.
Yeah, same logic can be applied to the Ladakh people because they are asking.
Except that there was a popular movement for.
Sir, popular, if you say in majority, no, sir.
Right.
So
But
that's,
popular even within Telangana?
yes, sir. But in that case,
See, unfortunately, in Jammu and Kashmir, popular on neither side.
no, sir. Ladakh is still popular, sir. They don't want to join with the Kashmir. In Ladakh also, Ladakh is also want to separate. Lay people doesn't want to stay with the Kashmir. That is also fact, sir. So it
Borderline,
yes,
yeah.
sir.
But I take your point.
Yes, sir. That's one thing. So secondly, sir, the thing is that now we see, rise of the Hindutva, rise of the rightist politics as a part of one individual is doing. That is the way my problem is coming up. Overall, we blame the particular prime minister or the present regime for the rise of the rightist politics or the Hindutva politics in the urban authoritarian politics in the contemporary times. But the problem is, sir, lying with all the parties, including regional parties like yours, or regional parties in our states, which are one way or the other compromised with the secular credentials which they profess all the time. For instance, I can still remember source of the speech in the midnight when your party joined with NDA 1, compromising the secular credentials of the national conference. So is the case with the DMK or the TDP. Most of the parties who are professed very strong secular credentials joined with the same religious parties and undermined the very democratic process and stifled the entire process. And due to that, the last people are developed cynical towards the very process of the political process. And third thing, sir, most humbly, I beg with you that money role is playing increasingly higher. If you say the first parliament to the contemporary times, the number of billionaires in the parliament almost reached to the 90%, and so is the case with state assemblies, sir. In this part of the world, in the southern India, if in a state assembly election costs crores of the rupees, even not lakhs, sir. And the parties are not giving seats to those who can't spend crores of the rupees for their candidature. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
So I think he answered that bit about sort of, don't look at the state assembly as your first route, start small. Rima.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My question is with respect to some of the recent events in the world. So we have all heard about Afghanistan and the things Taliban taking over, and now they've reached Kabul. So one question is, what is the responsibility of the world? And sir, if you were the Prime Minister of India, what would your response be to the emerging situation in Afghanistan? The second question is with respect to, does it have special implications for Kashmir? Kashmir shares a border, and there are a lot of security concerns. So do you feel the escalating situation in Afghanistan has anything that we should be concerned about when we think about Kashmir? Thank you.
No, great questions. Thank you. Well, I'm glad I'm not the Prime Minister. I don't aspire to that office, and I don't think, even if I aspired, I would ever get there, but that's neither here nor there. If I was in the office of the Prime Minister, I would look at simply the humanitarian fallout of what is happening in Afghanistan and try and address that to the best extent possible. Now, herein, I will open myself up to criticism that it is a Muslim country, Muslim problem. I am a Muslim Prime Minister, and therefore I am sort of being more generous with the Afghan refugees than I need to be. But I am saying that as Prime Minister, religion aside, I would look at the humanitarian problem in Afghanistan and try and at least give some space to the people who are fleeing from there and seeing how many we can adjust and accommodate temporarily here. That said, I also agree with what some of the American leaders have been saying, that look, at the end of the day, Afghanistan has to stabilize itself. If after 20 years and $1 trillion+ and I don't know how much money and training pumped into the army, if that army is unwilling to stand up and fight, then how long are you responsible for them? I mean, given the way they have capitulated over the last couple of weeks, it's safe to assume that the same thing would have happened a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. Nothing would have changed. So how long does the international community want to remain present militarily in Afghanistan? So there are two completely different things. I, as Prime Minister, would not advocate any military role for India in Afghanistan, but I would certainly look at increasing the humanitarian response to the crisis that exists there. Now, the second part of your question, is there going to be a fallout for Jammu and Kashmir? I hope to God not. I, for one, do not believe there will be, but I know there are enough voices within our security establishment that like to make us believe that, look, it's going to blow up in our faces. I think it will be very difficult for the sort of Taliban elements in Afghanistan to move across and start messing around with Jammu and Kashmir. Also, it will then fly in the face of everything we've been telling our own country. We've been telling the people of India that, look, Jammu and Kashmir is where it is because of our own, what we have done internally. Jammu and Kashmir is now stable because we have plugged our borders. Jammu and Kashmir is stable because infiltration has stopped. If Afghanistan, what happens in Afghanistan blows up in Kashmir, then we've been lying to our people. Then what's happened in Jammu and Kashmir, or what has been going on in Jammu and Kashmir in terms of lower levels of militancy, is nothing to do with us. It's purely to do with what's happening in our neighborhood. And I'd like to believe that we've been honest with the people of India and that things are stable because our borders are better managed, because infiltration is under control. And if that is the case, then I don't think we have as much to worry about as perhaps some would suggest.
Couple of last questions now. Here.
Hello, sir. I'm Nikita. So my question is related to the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, which encompass the Union Territory of now Union Territory of Ladakh. So we don't hear as much about the administration of Ladakh. You have led it as a chief minister. So I would like to understand if the division has been for the good. If not, why? Only on the administrative point of view. Thank you.
Well, let me answer that citing what the people of Ladakh did about a week or 10 days ago. All political parties and religious leaders cutting across what is otherwise a very sharp divide between Leh and Kargil all came together on one platform and demanded a state. Now, I mean, this is mind-boggling for me because all this while they've been telling the world that, look, we want a union territory, that all our problems will be solved by a union territory. Less than 2 years as a union territory and suddenly they're no longer enamored with what they got. And now they want a state. And not only that, if they had stopped at that, I would have been happy. But they went one step further. And they said, we want a state, and we want a state that has the same state subject laws that existed in erstwhile Jammu and Kashmir. Which means that if you are not a bona fide resident, born resident of Ladakh, you will not be able to buy property there. So, I mean, I think that answers your question as to how successful carving Ladakh as a union territory has been. The people of Ladakh themselves are not happy with how their lives have gone over the last couple of years.
Right.
Okay, can I ask a question? Okay, hi, good evening, sir. I'm Aloy. I come from Assam, and I happen to be the only representative of 8 states of Northeast India in the current cohort. So I'm kind of carrying 8 states.
Yeah, that's a big responsibility.
Yeah, so, but I mean, this again brings me to something that you have been repeatedly referring to, Dil se duri or Delhi se duri. The same applies also to Northeast India because the distance physically and also psychologically is quite vast, right? But at the same time, I want to ask you, how do you think we can de-provincialize these peripheral regions? Because every time you pose the question, I mean, even here, they have been mainly region-centric. Although you started your note, started your speech on focusing on youth politics in general, not on Kashmir. And similarly, I mean, when we are brought into topics, or whenever I personally try to participate in topics, repeatedly I've experienced being provincialized in the identity of the Northeast. So can you imagine a leader from Jammu and Kashmir, or any youth, or maybe from Northeast India, being a Prime Minister of India 5 or 10 years down the line? Will it ever be possible that the provinces are centralized?
That's a good one.
Prime Minister Abdullah.
No, that I don't see. In all honesty, I don't see. I think we have gone too far down the route of polarization for something like that to happen in the sort of short to medium term. Do I see somebody from the Northeast? Yes, just not belonging to a regional party. because numbers are what count. Yes, perhaps somebody in the BJP, or who knows, if the Congress throws up another Manmohan Singh type experiment, then belonging to one or two of those big parties. But otherwise, as a regional outfit, whether mine or any of the others from the Northeast, I don't see it happening. But that's because of numbers. That's not because the country wouldn't accept it. That's simply because Jammu and Kashmir contributes all of 5 members of parliament, and other than Assam, most of the Northeast states contribute 1 or 2 individually. The numbers just don't add up in what is obviously a numbers game.
What about all the halla around when Mamata Banerjee won? And so regional parties are out, or can there be enough of gravitational pull around a strong regional leader?
Even, a strong regional leader, how many seats do they account for at the end of the day? How many seats does West Bengal have? Even if she wins all of them, 30 plus, 40 odd? You do the maths. In the last parliament election, there were about 170 plus parliament seats in which it was a straight fight between the Congress and the BJP. And the BJP won more than 90% of those seats. So no matter how much we talk up the game of regional parties, even if we do a great job, unless the Congress, because let's remember, all our coalition governments have been anchored by one large party, either the Congress or the BJP. So unless the Congress gets the number to play that anchor role, the regional parties aren't going to amount to very much.
Okay, last two questions. Since you already have the mic, go ahead.
Hi everyone. Hello sir, I am Akshat. I just want to ask you sir this, that India and Pakistan have been fighting for Kashmir for past 75 years now. And when this Article 370 was removed, Pakistan was going on the international forums and saying that, it has been removed and there will be bloodbath and all these kind of thing. But India was responding that this is an internal matter only related to India and not to the world. So I want your perspective on how do you look at things, whether it is an internal matter or not, number one. Number two, how do you see a relation between India and Pakistan growing, even though if Kashmir is not solved?
Look, the constitutional relationship between Jammu and Kashmir and the rest of India is India's internal matter. I think Pakistan actually played into our hands by making such a big deal about what happened with Article 370. Pulling back their High Commissioner and stuff like that. Because as a Pakistani, I would have been shocked that we are protesting about a provision of the Indian Constitution that actually legitimizes the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India. From the get-go, Pakistan should have said that, look, we don't care. We don't recognize Jammu and Kashmir as a part of India. And therefore, whether Article 370 exists or not is of no consequence to us. And therefore, you do what you like, it doesn't matter. We believe that Jammu and Kashmir is disputed, and therefore, these things don't matter to us. The fact that Pakistan was willing to protest to restore a provision of the Indian Constitution that applied only to Jammu and Kashmir, that actually cemented Jammu and Kashmir's accession to India, was something India should have used to its advantage. Instead of telling Pakistan, you have no locus standi in this, you should shut up. We should have actually been encouraging them to say it more, because it actually reiterated India's position. Pakistan was defending a provision of the Indian Constitution that they had actually no business talking about. But chalo, wo ho gaya. Now, how do I see India and Pakistan's relationship going forward? It's going to be a difficult one. Obviously, Jammu and Kashmir is the biggest elephant in the room. But it's not the only elephant. There are so many other areas on which we disagree with each other. So even if by some huge miracle, tomorrow some leaders in India and Pakistan were going to take this solution forward and resolve the issue in Kashmir, that still leaves a whole host of other issues that we can't, that we haven't resolved. So there will always be sort of some element of friction in our relationship, even with really close neighbors. Look at our relationship with Nepal from time to time and how we mess that up. So let's not assume that just because we resolve Kashmir that the relationship between Pakistan and India will also sort of miraculously get better.
So we can keep, I think Omar can sit here for another 4 hours, but we can't have that. So the question from you, and then there's one boy at the back who hasn't put down his hand. You can put down your hand, I promise you I'll come. He's just been raising his hand. So go ahead, ask your question, and then just can we ask the mic to go at the back there?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for being here today. My question to you is very simple and straightforward. Can you just give me one of the biggest advantage that the ordinary citizens of Jammu and Kashmir had with the existence of Article 370? Only the biggest advantage of existence.
It was the constitutional link between Jammu and Kashmir and the rest of India, which is why Article 370 has not been removed from the Constitution. Part 1 of Article 370 remains in the Constitution. You have only watered it down. So when you ask me what is the single biggest advantage of Article 370, Article 370, and I continue to maintain that, is the constitutional bridge between Jammu and Kashmir and the rest of India. Without it, Jammu and Kashmir would not have a constitutional link with India. What bigger advantage do you want?
Okay, last question, the diligent gentleman.
Hello, sir. I'm Dr. Satish. Thank you, ma'am, for calling me boy.
You were raising your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to be noticed, so thank you. With reference to your recent interview with Times Now Navika Kumar, in addition to the political questions and other things, I found it very interesting. In the present context of neoliberalization, you were talking about Human Development Index, and you were talking about the standard of living of the people. I was wondering, I just want you to throw some light on how abrogation of the Article 370 has changed the, what are its implications on economy? How it changed the property ownership in Kashmir. And I believe, correct me if I am wrong, with the abrogation of the article, it has led the multinational corporations, Ambani, Adanis, into Kashmir by taking the land in the name of development. Could you please throw some light on this? How do you see the earlier economic model of Kashmir and the new...
Unless Mr. Adani and Mr. Ambani have surreptitiously invested in Jammu and Kashmir, I have not seen any evidence. In fact, that was one of my arguments with Ms. Kumar, that the promised investment into Jammu and Kashmir has not manifested itself on the ground anywhere. Now, you know, one of the questions that, was just asked to me, can I cite one of the examples of an advantage that Article 370 afforded the people of Jammu and Kashmir? Thankfully, your question has given me an answer. The land reforms of the late 40s, wherein tenant farmers were overnight converted into landowners without a rupee of compensation, in itself unique in Indian history, would not have been possible without the land ownership laws that were put into place under Article 370, because of the special status that Jammu and Kashmir enjoyed, which in turn allowed Jammu and Kashmir to have some of the lowest levels of poverty in the country, and allowed us to talk about some of the higher standards of living, in spite of 30 years of militancy. Those of you who are fortunate enough to visit Jammu and Kashmir and travel around Kashmir Valley will find it very difficult to actually spot a really poor Kashmiri. Even at the traffic lights in Srinagar today, 95% of our beggars are actually seasonal beggars who come from outside the state, outside the Union Territory, spend the season there and go back. And this is something that would not have been possible without the special status that J&K enjoyed under 370. So 370 is not just tokenism. It actually made a real difference to people's lives on the ground there.